Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my podcast, Between Two Worlds. I am your host, Annika, and well, today's topic we are just going to jump right into because I have a shit ton to cover here. So I hope you have your favorite drink. I personally am drinking some mugwort tea, and go ahead and get cozy so you can be ready to hear me yap about shapeshifting. Shapeshifting has to be one of the most misunderstood practices within spirituality, witchcraft, and the occult. And a lot of that misunderstanding has to do with the way it has been portrayed in movies and shows. Obviously, we don't just turn into giant werewolves or a horse or something and go run off into the woods. Um, However, shapeshifting in the context of magical practice isn't about physically transforming into animals. Though our ancestors certainly had some quite fascinating beliefs about that possibility, what we're exploring today is the ancient art of consciousness transformation, of temporarily adopting animal awareness and embodying different aspects of the natural world for magical, healing, and spiritual purposes. But we're also going to explore something even more profound, which is the projection of consciousness itself. And for me, this absolutely goes hand in hand, at least in my experience, with shapeshifting practice itself. So, this is the ability to extend your awareness beyond your physical body and experience the world through animal perception. This is a whole other rabbit hole when it comes to consciousness projection, but today we're just going to stick to shapeshifting. So you can really travel in spirit form while your body remains in trance, to literally see through the eyes and feel through the senses of other beings, in this case, an animal ally. This practice is rooted deepest in folklore and mythological traditions of virtually every culture on Earth, which I am going to talk about for the beginning of this episode. And please, in advance, excuse my pronunciation. I am not a linguistic by any means. However, I do try. So, from the berserkers of the Norse saga literature to Nahual shamans of Mesoamerica and Selkies of the Celtic folklore, and even in West African traditions, shapeshifting represents humanity's ancient understanding that consciousness is fluid and we can learn to perceive and interact with the world through non human awareness. What I'm talking about is not some new age fantasy. It's really spiritual technology that's been tested and refined over thousands of years. It's been preserved in folklore, encoded in mythology, and really and truly maintained by indigenous practitioners worldwide, even as dominant cultures forgot or demonized these ancient ways of being. So, today we're going to explore the authentic folkloric and mythological roots of shapeshifting, the different types of transformation practices that exist across cultures, and really how you can safely explore these ancient techniques in, well, your modern practice. We'll also address the religious programming and cultural fears that have kept people disconnected from one's humanity's most profound spiritual practices, because really, what would be an episode of this podcast without that little part, right? So, to do this topic as much justice as I can, let's dive deep into some folklore, mythology, and theological systems, because after all, this is not a modern invention. And as a big fat disclaimer or preface here, I'm really just going to share mostly what I know and what I have researched personally from my own years of practice on this topic. And I'm not claiming to be an expert or a scholar in these traditions or even a practitioner within these specific cultures. So, with that, let's get started with Norse tradition because we have some of the most detailed historical accounts of shapeshifting practices here. While I'm not a pagan or practice within the Norse pantheon, I certainly have dipped my toes in the water and, I'm very interested in these parts. So the berserkers weren't just fierce warriors. They were practitioners of Seidr, which is magic who could literally embody the consciousness of bears, or Bjorn, or wolves, which is Ulfr. And what's particularly fascinating in the Norse sources is the detailed descriptions of consciousness projection. The Ynglinga saga describes Odin himself as the original shapeshifter, saying that his body would lie as if dead or asleep, but he himself would, be able to take the shape of a bird or a beast. a fish or serpent, and would travel in the twinkling of an eye to distant lands. This is a precise description of what modern practitioners would call astral projection in animal form. Odin's body remains in trance while his consciousness, his uger, or mind spirit, projects outward in animal form to gather information, influence events, or communicate across vast distances. So the concept of firja takes this even further. Every person was believed to have an animal counterpart that existed primarily in the spirit realm, and skilled practitioners could consciously merge their awareness with this animal aspect. So when seers wanted to spy on distant events, they would project their animal counterpart, experiencing the world through animal senses while their human body remained in a deep trance. So the Landmannabok describes Ingminendur. Uh, please excuse me. I don't know what other English word I could use for that, so I tried. The the old who could send his consciousness in the form of a walrus to scout new lands before his ships arrived. He would literally see through the walrus's eyes, experiencing the underwater landscape and coastal features that would be crucial for navigation and settlement. Celtic tradition gives us equally rich folkloric evidence of consciousness projection and shapeshifting practices. The Druids weren't just priests, they were masters of what the Irish called soul flight, the ability to project consciousness in animal form for divination, for warfare, and spiritual communication. The Akalav Nashinorak describes Druids who could send their consciousness in the form of ravens to observe distant battles, returning with detailed information that could really have only been gathered through direct observation. This wasn't just metaphorical, these were practical techniques for intelligence gathering and strategic planning. All right, so moving on to Mesoamerican traditions, where we find, some of the most sophisticated theological frameworks for consciousness projection and shapeshifting. The Nahual tradition among various Mexican and Central American peoples describes, precise techniques for projecting awareness through animal consciousness. So, according to the Nahual theology, every person has an animal double called their Nahual that really exists simultaneously in both the physical and the spirit realms. Trained practitioners could consciously transfer their awareness into their Nawal form, experiencing the world through animal senses while their human body remained in the ritual trance. Bernardino de Sahagún ethnographic accounts describes Nawales who could project their consciousness through jaguars to hunt in the spirit realms, through eagles to survey vast territories, or through serpents to communicate with underworld spirits. These weren't symbolic journeys, they were understood as a literal consciousness transfers that allowed access to information and capabilities beyond normal human perception. The Codex Florentinos describes specific techniques where the practitioner's consciousness would, quote, ride within the animal's awareness, experiencing the world through jaguar night vision, eagle thermal detection, or serpent ground vibration sensing. The human consciousness didn't replace the animals, it instead merged with it, creating a hybrid awareness that combines human intelligence with animal instinct and perception. African traditions preserve, some of the most detailed and sophisticated consciousness projection practices themselves. Among the Bakongo people, the concept of kendoki includes the ability of skilled practitioners to project their awareness through leopard consciousness for hunting, warfare, and spiritual work alike. The ethnographer Wyatt McGaffey documented these accounts of the Kendoki practitioners whose bodies would remain motionless in this trance while their consciousness traveled through leopard form across vast distances. They could literally see through leopard eyes, tracking through leopard scent, and move through the landscape with leopard stealth and agility. What's really fucking remarkable about this is in this tradition, the understanding that consciousness projection through animals allows access to different layers of reality. Leopard consciousness operates primarily in the physical realm, but can perceive spirits. Bird consciousness can access the sky realm where ancestors' spirits dwell, and serpent consciousness can navigate through underground realms of earth spirits and buried knowledge. West African folklore speak of were hyenas, where someone could project their consciousness through hyena form for specifically necromantic work and communication with the dead. This really akins to the hyena's natural ability to consume carrion and thrive in liminal spaces, which really made it ideal as a vehicle for consciousness that needed to navigate between the realms of the living and the dead. Now, lastly, moving to Asian traditions, Japanese folklore gives us accounts of consciousness projection that go far beyond simple shapeshifting. The Kitsune Tsu- Tsuki, if I said that right, tradition describes people who allow fox consciousness to merge with their own, creating a hybrid awareness that can perceive spiritual realms normally invisible to human consciousness. But there are also accounts of human practitioners who learned to project their awareness through fox consciousness. They could send their consciousness through fox form to spy on distant events, to influence dreams and thoughts of others, or to gather information from the spirit realm. The fox's natural cunning and ability to move between worlds made it an ideal vehicle for this consciousness projection. And Chinese tradition preserves detailed techniques for the projection through various animal forms, including dragon consciousness for weather working and accessing imperial spiritual authority. Tiger consciousness for protective magic and even martial applications, and crane for longevity practices and communication with immortal spirits. What unites all these traditions is the understanding that consciousness is not limited to the human body or even to human perception. Consciousness can be extended, projected, and merged with other awareness, and used to gather information and influence events far beyond the reach of the physical body. This represents one of humanity's most sophisticated spiritual technologies, the ability to literally expand awareness beyond normal human limitations by temporarily adopting the consciousness and the perceptual capabilities of other beings. Okay, so now that we've explored the foundations through history of shapeshifting, at least to my satisfaction for now, obviously there are many, many more, and I trust everyone to do their own research if you want to find out more about the folklore and history of this specific topic. But let's get practical about the different types of transformation practices that you can actually explore safely in your own magical work. What our ancestors understood and what modern practitioners are rediscovering is that there are multiple ways to temporarily adopt animal consciousness and access their unique gifts. And I want to be clear from the start, we are not talking about literal physical transformation. Again, I don't know why. I feel like I just have to keep putting that disclaimer out there. Even though that isn't an impossible as modern rationalism would have us believe, what we're exploring are consciousness techniques, energy practices, and spiritual methods that allow us to temporarily step outside human perception and experience the world through animal awareness. These practices really exist on a spectrum, from simple visualization and meditation to profound trance states where the boundary between human and animal consciousness becomes genuinely fluid. So let's talk about energetic shapeshifting first. This is probably the most accessible form of shapeshifting for beginner practitioners, and it's based on the understanding that every animal has a distinctive energetic signature, a pattern of movement, awareness, and being that we can learn to temporarily adopt. When you work with energetic shapeshifting, you are not trying to become an animal physically. Instead, you are learning to attune your energy field to theirs, to move with their rhythm, to think with their patterns, to sense the world through their particular gifts. For example, if you are working with wolf energy, you might practice moving with the pack mind, that sense of collective awareness where individual ego sort of dissolves into this group consciousness. You might develop a wolf's territorial awareness, that ability to sense who belongs and who doesn't, what's safe and what is threatening. You might tap into a wolf's hunting instincts, the specific persistence and the patience, the ability to track something for miles until you find what you're seeking. Or if you're working with, let's say, hawk energy, you might practice that intense focus where everything else falls away except your target. That ability to see details from great distances, to spot patterns that others miss, to maintain perspective while staying absolutely present to the moment. The key to energetic shapeshifting is really studying your chosen animal, not just their physical characteristics, but their social patterns, their hunting or foraging behaviors, their relationship to their environment, and most of all, their survival strategies. Because the more you understand how they move through the world, the better you can temporarily adopt those patterns for your own magical work. Okay, now let's get to the really fun stuff, astral and spirit shapeshifting. This is where we get into the profound consciousness projection techniques. Astral shapeshifting involves, literally projecting your consciousness out of your physical body, your spirit body separated from your physical body in animal form, allowing you to travel, observe, and sometimes influence events from a non-human perspective. When you project an animal form, you gain access to that animal's particular perceptual gifts. Projecting as a bird gives you aerial perspective, obviously, and the ability to cover large distances quickly. Projecting as a wolf allows you to track energy trails and sense pack dynamics that human consciousness might miss. And projecting as a snake lets you move unseen and sense the subtle vibrations that reveal hidden information. The traditional technique involves entering a deep trance state, often facilitated by drumming, which I find to be very useful, specific breathing patterns, or even plant allies, and then consciously transferring your awareness into your chosen animal form. Your physical body remains in trance while your projected consciousness experiences the world through these animal senses. And I want to be clear that this is advanced work that requires significant training and practice, at least in the astral part. Um, you need to be at least skilled at basic meditation, comfortable with being in these altered states of consciousness, and having a solid grounding technique before you attempt consciousness projection. But when done skillfully, it provides access to information and perspectives that are simply impossible to obtain through ordinary human consciousness. So, dream shapeshifting is a gentler introduction to this type of work. You can begin by setting intentions before you sleep to dream in animal form or to meet animal teachers in your dreams who can guide your transformation practice. Lucid dreaming techniques allow you to consciously shapeshift within the dream state, and practicing the consciousness shifts that can later be applied to waking projection. Okay, now let's talk a little bit weirder, I guess, the physical mimicry and embodiment. I know you hear physical and shape-shifting, and you're going to picture getting down on all fours and walking around and barking, but that's not what I'm talking about. This approach works through the body to change your consciousness, using the principle that when you move like an animal, you more specifically breathe like an animal and hold your body like an animal, your consciousness naturally begins to shift toward that animal's awareness. So, really, modern neuroscience backs this up through research and embodied cognition in mirror neurons. When we physically mimic movements and postures, our brains actually begin to activate the same neural pathways associated with those movements. So when you move like a cat, that liquid grace, that watchful stillness, and the sudden explosive movement, your nervous system begins to attune to that feline awareness. Breathing techniques are particularly powerful for this type of work. Every animal has distinctive breathing patterns that reflect their really lifestyle and their consciousness. Predators often breathe slowly and deeply, maintaining calm alertness, while prey animals might breathe more rapidly, constantly scanning for threats. And birds have entirely different respiratory systems that create different rhythms and patterns. So, when you consciously adopt these breathing patterns, you begin to shift into the corresponding state of consciousness. Facial expressions and even micro movements are all incredibly powerful. The way you hold your eyes, the tension in your jaw, the position of your head, all of these affect your state of consciousness. So you could practice making the facial expressions of your chosen animal, even if it feels a little silly at first. The physical changes will naturally create corresponding mental and emotional shifts. So, ritual shape-shifting. This involves using external tools and ceremonial structures to facilitate transformation into this animal consciousness. And masks are probably the most traditional and effective tool for this type of work. When you put on an animal mask, especially one that you've created yourself with intention and ritual, it creates an immediate psychological shift that helps you step outside your human identity. And I have a feeling there's going to be jokes here about furries, but I'm just going to ignore that. I do want to do a little shout out here, talking about masks, because I don't think I have encountered another witch in the community or author or podcaster or whatever mentioning this, but I read New World Witchery's book by Corey Thomas Hutchison. He also has a podcast, and it's literally called New World Witchery. But he mentions this in the book, and honestly, I was really surprised and very pleased to read that section. So, trust me, it is a thing. Traditional cultures understood that masks aren't just props, they are spiritual technologies that help facilitate consciousness change. When you wear a bear mask, you are not pretending to be a bear, you are creating a ritual container that allows bear consciousness to temporarily inhabit your human form. Dance and movement rituals are equally powerful. Every animal has characteristic movements and rhythms, and when you dance in these patterns, especially in a ritual space with specific intention, they naturally induce the corresponding states of this consciousness. Native American traditions preserve incredibly sophisticated animal dances that were designed specifically to invoke and embody different animal spirits. Drumming and percussion creates the altered states of consciousness that makes shapeshifting even possible. Different rhythms can induce different types of animals. Steady, persistent beats might invoke predator awareness, while rapid, irregular rhythm might connect you with the nervous alertness of prey animals. And slow, deeper rhythms can help you access the ancient wisdom of long lived creatures like elephants or whales. Plant allies have been used traditionally to facilitate shapeshifting experiences as well. Though I just want to stress this requires significant knowledge and should never be attempted without any proper guidance or training. Different plants can create the altered states of consciousness that allow for deeper transformation experiences, but this is mostly advanced, I would say. I mean, what does that word even mean? But I hopefully you get what I'm trying to say. This involves real risk and should only be undertaken with someone who is specifically experienced within the herbal field. So, psychological shapeshifting. This approach focuses on consciously adopting animal mindsets and psychological patterns for specific purposes. It's about temporarily setting aside human conditioning in social programming to access more primal, instinctual ways of being. Every animal represents different psychological gifts and perspective. Wolf consciousness represents this loyal pack thinking and the ability to work toward a long term goal with persistence. And foxes embody cunning, adaptability, and the ability to find creative solutions to complex problems. And bears can offer things like protective strength, the ability to set boundaries, and connection to ancient instinctual wisdom. When you consciously adopt these mindsets, you gain access to capabilities that might be suppressed or underdeveloped even in your normal human personality. Someone who struggles with assertiveness might work with lion consciousness to access natural authority. Someone who feels scattered or even unfocused might work with hawk consciousness to develop this laser like concentration. And this is also powerful shadow work. Many of us have been taught to suppress our more, quote, animal impulses. Things like our sexuality, our anger, our competitive instincts, our territorial feelings, the things that really make humans still animal. Working the animal consciousness in a conscious, I'm saying that word a lot, ritualized way allows us to integrate these aspects of ourselves rather than repressing them. So, really, the key is understanding that you're not trying to become an animal permanently. You're temporarily accessing their gifts to solve specific problems or even develop particular capabilities. After the work is done, you consciously return to your human psyche, but you retain the insights and the abilities that you gained through that animal perspective. Now, I want to address something that I think is crucial for modern practitioners, the actual science and psychology behind these ancient practices, because really what our ancestors knew intuitively, modern research is now proving. And this consciousness is far more malleable than we've been taught. And the techniques that they used for shapeshifting are really based on legitimate and now measurable changes in brain function and this consciousness, which I believe I touched on when I talked about brainwave states. And, I'm not trying to reduce these profound spiritual practices to mere neurology, but understanding the mechanisms behind them can help us practice more effectively and address the skepticism that keeps people from exploring these powerful techniques. Plus, honestly, science is just fascinating and makes what our ancestors accomplished even more impressive. And one of the most important discoveries in modern neuroscience is neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself, form new neural connections, and even change its physical structure throughout our lives. This means that when we repeatedly practice specific movements through patterns or states of consciousness, we literally rewire our brains to make those patterns more accessible. This is why meditation and practice makes perfect. When you practice shape shifting techniques regularly, whether that's animal movements, your breathing patterns, or your visualization practices, you're creating new neural pathways that make it easier to access animal like states of consciousness on the regular. Your brain actually develops the capacity to switch between different modes of awareness. Embodied cognition research shows us that the mind and the body aren't separate entities. They're part of an integrated system where physical changes directly affect mental and emotional states. When you change your posture, your movement patterns, or even your facial expressions, you create corresponding changes in your thoughts, in your emotions, and your perceptions. This is why physical mimicry is such a powerful shape-shifting technique. Mirror neurons play a fascinating role in this process. These are specialized brain cells that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing that same action. They are part of how we learn through imitation and how we develop empathy with other beings. When you watch an animal moving and then mimic those movements, your mirror neurons help create neural patterns that correspond to that animal's way of being. It's like your brain is learning to quote speak a different language of movement and awareness because technically you are. The more you practice, the more fluent you become in that animal's particular form of consciousness. And the acting as if principle, that's, well, established in psychology also, which applies here. When we consciously adopt the behaviors, the postures, and the mindsets of confidence, we actually become more confident. We've all heard fake it till you make it. When we adopt the behaviors and the mindsets of these specific animals, we gain access to their particular gifts and their capabilities. So that has me segue onto talking about these altered states. The techniques that traditional cultures use to facilitate the shapeshifting, like drumming, repetitive movement, breath work, sensory deprivation, or even sensory overload, all create measurable changes in brainwave activity and neurochemistry. Rhythmic drumming, for example, has been shown to synchronize brain waves and induce theta waves, the same brainwave pattern that associates with deep meditation and REM sleep and profound creativity. In these states, the boundaries between self and other become more permeable, making it easier to experience consciousness beyond normal human limitations. And breathwork creates changes in the balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the blood, which directly affects brain function and consciousness. And different breathing patterns can induce anything from deep relaxation to intense alertness to, mythical and mystical states of consciousness. When you adopt the breathing patterns of different animals, you're using the same mechanisms to shift into their particular state. So, repetitive movement, like the animal movements used in shapeshifting, can induce what you call flow states or transpersonal experiences. These are states where ordinary self consciousness dissolves and you become completely absorbed in the activity. In the context of shapeshifting, this is when human identity starts to dissolve and the animal consciousness can now start to emerge. Sensory manipulation, whether through darkness, blindfolds, or, like I said, sensory overload, even, forces the brain to reorganize how it processes information. This creates opportunities for accessing different types of perception, like the enhanced hearing and smell that animals rely on. You've probably heard of how, blind people have said their other senses have grown stronger, or vice versa with any other sense. Okay, so now I want to address this carefully in big red at your own risk letters because it's such an important part of historical shapeshifting practice, but it also involves serious risks and legal considerations. Traditional cultures around the world used various plants to facilitate consciousness alteration and spiritual transformation. The famous European flying ointments, which we've talked about, contained plants like henbane, belladonna, and datura. Honestly, I do have my own datura ointment, but I don't always use it. I think it's important to learn these techniques without the substance enhancements, but also to use it with caution and when it is necessary. And, so these plants create profound altered states of consciousness due to their entheogenic properties and different alkaloids. But that is a whole other rabbit hole for maybe another day. But historical accounts describe people who used these preparations, reporting experiences of flying, shapeshifting, and traveling to other worlds. These plants create these states of consciousness where the boundaries between human and animal awareness become extremely permeable. So, back to modern neuroscience, which is beginning to understand how these plants work on brain chemistry to create these profound changes. Many of them affect serotonin receptors, which are crucial for regulating perception, your mood, and your consciousness. However, and this is extremely important, most of these plants are either illegal in most places or extremely dangerous if used without proper knowledge. The traditional flying ointments contained plants that are literally poisonous and have killed people who try to use them without the proper training. Even the quote safer plants used in these contexts should only be used under the guidance of, experienced practitioners and in legal settings, blah 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 blah. You get what I'm trying to say. The good news is that you absolutely do not need to use plant allies to explore shapeshifting. And some would argue, again, you should have a solid foundation and relationship with these plant allies before doing so. But the consciousness states that these plants facilitate can also be reached through drumming, through breathwork, movement, and other non chemical means. In fact, like I said, learning to access these states naturally is often more stable and integrated than plant induced experiences. And I myself do not always use the help of these plant allies to achieve my desired results. So, one of the most fascinating areas of research relevant to shapeshifting is what scientists are learning about the neurology of identity and self concept. And it turns out that our sense of self, that feeling of being a consistent, bounded individual, is actually created by specific neural networks in the brain. The default mode network is a set of brain regions that become active when we're not focused on the external world and the mind is wandering to internal thoughts. This network is heavily involved in self referential thinking, thoughts about me and my identity. When this network is very active, we have a strong sense of being a separate individual self. But research shows that during deep meditation, psychedelic experiences, and certain other altered states, activity in the default mode network decreases dramatically. When this happens, people often report experiences of ego dissolution. The boundaries of self become permeable or really disappear entirely. This is exactly what happens during successful shapeshifting experiences. The rigid sense of human identity softens or dissolves, creating space for animal consciousness to emerge. The techniques used in shapeshifting practice, like the drumming and the repetitive movement, and especially the focused visualization, all tend to decrease default mode network activity and create these more fluid states of consciousness. Okay, so I promise I'm not going to keep going on about this whole sciencey stuff, but there's just a few more things I want to touch on. And another area of research involves these mirror neurons that we talked about and our capacity for cross-species empathy. These specialized cells were originally discovered when researchers found that certain neurons in monkey brains would fire both when the monkey performed an action and when it watched a human researcher performing that same action. Humans have even more sophisticated mirror neuron systems, and they don't just respond to other humans, they can be activated by observing animals as well. So, when you watch a cat hunting or a bird flying, your mirror neurons are firing and creating neural patterns that correspond to those movements and those intentions. I think this suggests that the capacity for shapeshifting, for temporarily accessing animal consciousness, might be built into our neural architecture. Our brains are literally designed to resonate with and mimic other forms of consciousness, including the non human awareness. Research on animal empathy and interspecies communication is revealing that, the boundaries between different types of consciousness are much more permeable than we previously thought. Many animals show evidence of empathy, self awareness, and even rudimentary culture. Yes, is a whole another thing, and we could talk about animism and within the magical practice and all that space, but I digress. You know, it is reconnecting the aspects of consciousness that we share with all living beings. So, from an evolutionary standpoint, the ability to understand and predict animal behavior really was literally a matter of survival for our ancestors. Those who could think like their prey became better hunters. Those who could think like predators became better at avoiding becoming prey themselves. The capacity for shapeshifting might have evolved as a sophisticated form of survival intelligence, the ability to temporarily adopt animal consciousness in order to understand, predict, and interact with other species more effectively. In this sense, shapeshifting represents one of humanity's oldest and most fundamental skills. Really, what I'm trying to communicate here is that what we've lost in modern life isn't just a connection to nature. It's the fundamental capacity to step outside narrow human consciousness and access the broader spectrum of awareness that we share with all life. Reclaiming shapeshifting practices isn't just about magic or spiritual development, it's about remembering what it means to be fully human. So, with that aside, let's get into the practical work because understanding history and science is fascinating, but what you really want to know is how to actually do this. How do you safely explore shapeshifting in your own practice? How do you begin to access animal consciousness without losing yourself in the process? And this is a big one. Again, fucking a spiritual psychosis and all that shit is huge, and I just want to put a big disclaimer out there. If you're going to get into this stuff, just please always do mental checks and remember that you are human, you're living a human experience. So, let's talk about emphasizing safety and grounding because this work can be profoundly transformative, and anything that is powerful needs to be approached with respect and preparation. We're talking about temporarily dissolving the boundaries of normal human consciousness, and that requires both courage and wisdom and a shit ton of discernment. The techniques I'm sharing today are based on traditional practices from various cultures, but I have adapted them for modern practitioners, really myself, working without the years of formal training or initiations because I do not have any quote formal training or initiations. I just have my experience and my UPG. So, with that said, please be discerning. Again, these are safe, accessible approaches that can help you dip your toes into the waters of consciousness transformation without diving straight into the deep end. So let's start with the animal meditation, which is probably the most accessible entry point into shapeshifting work. This isn't just visualization, it's a technique for genuinely connecting with and temporarily adopting animal consciousness. Choose an animal that you feel drawn to, that represents qualities you want to develop. Don't worry about whether it's, quote, spiritual enough or if it seems too ordinary, even. House cat can be as powerful as a teacher as a wolf or an eagle can. The key is authentic resonance, not exotic appeal. Set up a quiet space where you won't be interrupted. Light a candle or incense if that helps you enter sacred space. Sit comfortably and begin with basic grounding and centering. Feel your connection to the earth, your breathing, you're moving in and out, and your body's relaxing into stillness. Now, after you've done your personal grounding and centering, begin to build a detailed mental image of your chosen animal. Instead of just visualizing it externally, start to imagine what it would feel like to inhabit that body. How does it move? How does it hold its weight? What do its muscles feel like when it walks or runs? I'm going to be honest, this takes a lot of skill and or experience when it comes to visualization practices. If you have a hard time with this, it might prove to take longer for success. It's not impossible though. Ideally, you should at least be as skilled at the apple technique or even greater. Put shortly, you should be able to perfectly build and replicate an apple in your mind's eye, floating in front of you. You should know the exact size, the look, the texture, the sound, the smell, and really all of the above. It should be able to move in a 3D fashion in perfect replication. Eventually, within shapeshifting, you should be able to instinctively know and see with all senses how the smallest of hairs and muscles look and feel in addition to your environment. So, pay particular attention to these senses. How does the world smell to this animal? What can it hear that you might miss? How does its vision differ from human sight? If you're working with a cat, for instance, imagine how the world looks in that enhanced twilight vision. How every small sound becomes significant, and how scent carries information about who's been in a space and when. Don't try to force this experience, just hold the intention to connect with the animal's way of being and allow whatever happens to happen. You might feel subtle shifts in your posture or breathing. You might notice different thoughts or impulses arising. You might start to see your environment from a different perspective. When you're ready to end the meditation, obviously thank the animal for sharing its consciousness with you and deliberately return to your human awareness. Feel your human body, remember your human concerns, your plans, your job, reestablish your normal sense of identity. This conscious return is crucial for a healthy practice. Breathing techniques offer another gentle entry point. Every animal has characteristic breathing patterns that reflect their lifestyle and consciousness. By consciously adopting these patterns, you can begin to shift into corresponding states of awareness. For example, predator breathing tends to be slow, deep, and really controlled. This reflects their need to remain calm and focused while hunting. To practice predator breathing, inhale slowly for a count of 6, hold for 4, and exhale for 6. This patient controlled rhythm naturally induces the steady alertness of the predator animal. So, bird breathing is different entirely. Birds have much more efficient respiratory systems than mammals, and with air sacs that allow for continuous oxygen flow. You might mimic this by taking quick, light breaths with very little pause between inhale and exhale. And this creates a sense of lightness and elevation that naturally reconnects you with the avian consciousness. Snake breathing involves very slow, deep breaths with long pauses between them. Inhale for 8 counts, hold for 8, and exhale for 8, and pause for 8. This deliberate hypnotic rhythm induces the still, watchful consciousness that serpents embody. So, practice these different breathing patterns and notice how they affect your state of mind and body. Some will feel more natural to you than others, and that can give you clues about which animal consciousness you might have the strongest natural affinity with. Movement work is equally powerful for beginning practitioners. You can start simple, just practice sitting and standing the way different animals do. A cat's posture is completely different from a dog's, which is different from a horse's or a bird's. Each reflection of a different relationship to the world, a different sense of how to hold your energy and your attention. Maybe cat posture is about fluid readiness. They can go from complete relaxation to explosive action in an instant, but they're never completely off. Practice sitting with that quality, relaxed but alert, peaceful but ready. Notice how it changes your mental state. A wolf posture is grounded and steady with weight evenly distributed, and attention constantly scanning the environment. It's less about individual readiness and more about pack awareness, that sense of being part of a larger whole. Bear posture is solidly grounded, with weight settled low and a sense of unshakable presence. Bears move with deliberate power, never hurried, but never to be underestimated either. Practice walking in these different modes too. Cat walking is silent and fluid, wolf might be steady and tireless, and bear is powerful and deliberate. Each creates a different internal state that can be used to access specific qualities when you need them. So, moving up a little bit on technique. Once you're comfortable with the basic animal meditation, breathing, and movement, you can begin exploring mask work. Masks are incredibly powerful tools for consciousness transformation, but they create an immediate psychological shift that helps you step outside of human identity. You don't need elaborate or expensive masks. Simple ones work fine, or you can make your own. Preferably, you can make your own. Creating your own mask can be a part of the magical practice. The process of crafting it with intention helps establish a relationship between you and the animal consciousness it represents. When you put on the mask, don't just wear it, allow it to change you. Insert the mask film with Jim Carrey now. Feel your facial expressions shifting to match the animal. Let your posture change. Allow your movements to become more animal-like. This isn't pretending or acting. It is using the mask as a ritual tool to facilitate genuine consciousness transformation. Start with short sessions. Again, always end by consciously removing the mask and returning to your human identity. Thank the animal consciousness for sharing its gifts with you, and take time to integrate whatever insights or experiences you had. Dance shapeshifting takes this further by using movement to induce profound consciousness changes. Again, start simple. Choose an animal and study how it moves, not just the way it obviously moves, but the subtle ones. How it tilts its head when it's listening, how it shifts its weight when alert, how it uses different parts of its body to communicate. You could put on music that evokes your chosen animal, something rhythmic or feline for feline movements, something wild and primal for wolf dances, something light and airy for birds, and begin dancing the animal's characteristic movements. But allow yourself to go deeper than just mimicry. Let the movements change your breathing, your thoughts, and your entire state of being. Pay attention to the movement when the movements start to feel automatic. When you stop thinking about what to do next and the animal consciousness starts to move you instead. That's when the real transformation happens. When you stop being a human, pretending to be an animal, and start genuinely embodying animal awareness. Drumming journeys combine rhythmic induction with consciousness projection. You'll need either a drum or recorded drumming. There are obviously excellent tracks available specifically designed for this sort of work. The rhythm should be steady and monotonous, around 180 to 200 beats per minute. Lie down comfortably and cover your eyes. Set a clear intention to journey to meet your power animal or to explore a specific question from an animal perspective. As the drumming begins, allow the rhythm to carry you into a trance state. Don't force visions or experiences, just flow and follow with the drumming and see where it takes you. You might find yourself in natural settings like forests, mountains, rivers. You might encounter animals who want to communicate with you instead, and you might experience the sensation of becoming an animal yourself. The key is to remain relaxed and open while maintaining enough awareness to remember the experience. Some people find it helpful to keep a journal nearby so they can record impressions immediately after the journey ends. Shadow animal work addresses something that many practitioners avoid, but that is crucial for balanced practice. Not all animal consciousness is, quote, nice or comfortable. Surprise, surprise. Predators have aggression. Scavengers deal with death and decay. Many animals have territorial, competitive, or even survival instincts that might trigger our human conditioning about being good. But these shadowy aspects aren't evil, they're natural and necessary parts of life. Working with challenging animal consciousness can help you integrate aspects of yourself that you might have been taught to suppress. If you've been taught to always be nice and avoid conflict, working with the wolf or the bear consciousness can help you access healthy aggression and boundary settings. If you've learned to fear your own sexuality or sensuality, cat or serpent consciousness might help you reclaim those aspects of yourself. And the key is to approach shadow animal work with respect and specific intentions. Don't just invite predator consciousness to see what happens. Work with it for specific purposes. Know your intention to help you stand up to maybe a bully or access courage for a difficult conversation, to tap into primal vitality when you're feeling depleted. So now a little bit more of a advanced practice is sustained shapeshifting, which involves maintaining animal consciousness for extended periods, maybe an hour or few rather than just a few minutes or seconds. This requires significant practice and should only be attempted when you're very comfortable with the shorter sessions. The risk is getting so absorbed in animal consciousness that you have a difficulty returning to your human awareness. Start with gradually extending your sessions. If you're comfortable with 20-minute animal meditations, try 30, then 40, and then try an hour. Always have a timer on or your alarm to remind you when it is time to return. So during extended sessions, you might begin to experience genuine shifts in perception. Colors might look different. Sounds might be more significant. You might find yourself noticing details in your environment that you normally miss. I'm thinking of, sorry if this is silly, but I'm immediately thinking of Twilight when Bella turns into a vampire and she sees the spider spinning the web and the water droplets and the waterfall and all that crazy shit. These are signs that you're truly accessing animal awareness rather than just imagining it. Spontaneous shifting is the ability to quickly access animal consciousness in moments of need without formal ritual or preparation. This develops naturally after years of practice, but you can cultivate it deliberately by practicing quick transitions. You can try setting aside some time when you're doing ordinary tasks like maybe washing the dishes, walking to the store, folding laundry, and practice briefly shifting into this animal consciousness while continuing the activity. Can you wash dishes with cat consciousness? I know that sounds extremely silly, but it's just an example. Noticing the texture and the sound of everything with feline sensitivity. Can you walk with wolf awareness, constantly scanning and assessing your environment? This kind of practice helps you integrate shapeshifting skills into daily life rather than keeping them confined to a formal ritual space. Or if that really suits you, go ahead and do that. Me personally, I do not uh, integrate this in my daily life or my daily practice. It is absolutely something that is a little bit more formal and more intentional for me nowadays. So eventually, you might find that you can access specific animal qualities like cat stealth, your focus of a hawk, and bear strength whenever you need them. And this kind of taps deeper into the more psychological aspect of it. So now, to get personal, I want to share two of my experiences when it comes to shapeshifting, particularly in the beginning. The first time it happened to me, believe it or not, I was actually not actively trying to shapeshift or project my consciousness because it happened to me through stargazing. It like honestly happened to me. I didn't try to do anything. I had been outside for quite a while, I think at this point, and was definitely in an altered state of consciousness, but I remember being suddenly moved across the sky. Like my vision was looking at the same sky suddenly, but from a different place and through different eyes this time. Things became sharper. My sense of smell increased by what seemed like 1,000%, and I was suddenly cold. I wasn't freezing. I could feel my body heat regulating in my system, but it felt like my skin was much closer to the air than what it feels like with clothes on. But there was a barrier of short fur. I could feel the sheer size of my presence and calmness inside me. I absolutely felt my human body become stuck as I was experiencing this. I was under an acacia tree and the sky was incredibly bright, seeing more than just the stars, but the Milky Way and nebulous gases in the sky besides the moon. Tall grass swished in the breeze and the earth smelled of, well, earth, dirt, clay, blood, and a damp, like a wet dampness. I could hear brush moving, small insects conversing in the distance. I quickly realized that what I had projected into was a lioness. I have no idea how it happened, but I truly felt as if I was living through her eyes. I did not become the lioness. That much was clear to me, but I was suddenly sharing consciousness with her. I felt her surroundings, her cub beside me, her heavy breath and slightly bloated belly, even like she had just ate. And she was calm and stoic, but ever present with this boundless aura of power and authority. The transformation didn't last very long, but honestly, I'm forever thankful for the time that I did get. I have never felt so many things at once before that at one time, and I truly was stunned at what had happened. I actually didn't know what the fuck happened, so that is where my journey really began when it came to discovering the practice of shapeshifting. So at this point, some time went by and I had more of an understanding of what all this was, and I wanted to actively try this again, this time of an animal of my choosing and one that I'm deeply close with, which is a wolf. And this trance experience happened in the astral realm this time. It didn't carry the same weight of my first experience. I knew I was in full control this time. I wasn't sharing a consciousness with an animal, more or less. This was a true shape-shifting experience. I will spare you the whole story, but the experience was just as incredible. I could walk, run, smell, and play. I was actually with one of my very close astral guides, who is a raven, or manifests as a raven, at least in the astral realm. He led me through the woods for a while. I felt the leaf litter beneath me crunch under heavy paws, the weight of my coat, and I think one of the most interesting things I've experienced is when shapeshifting into an animal, they have a completely different taste in their mouth. It's so hard to explain without just experiencing it, but it is very, very distinct. Anyway, I will jump ahead and say this experience ended not so good. I ended up running through a netted trap and was almost pulled out of the astral experience altogether from it. I could feel my body breathing extremely fast in a panic in my human body as I was in this trance. My eyes darted behind my closed eyelids and I couldn't move. So I know I was still immersed, but I could feel the horror, the panic, the ropes as I thrashed all four limbs and entangled myself deeper and deeper into the net. Long story short, I ended up abruptly ending that experience, not on purpose, but because my system succumbed really to the panic and I was yanked out of the trance. So it's important to understand that not every session will be dramatic or profound. Sometimes the shifts are very subtle. You might just notice that you feel slightly different, more grounded or alert or confident. That's still valid and it's still very valuable work. The dramatic experiences are wonderful when they happen, but the subtle ones are often just as transformative in the long run. So, with that said, I can't stress enough how important proper grounding is for this work. Every shapeshifting session should end with deliberate, conscious return to the human identity, not just, let the experience fade away. Actively choose to come back. Feel your human body, remember your name, your human relationships, your responsibilities. If you're feeling disoriented or like part of you still out there, try physical grounding techniques like eating something, touch objects around you, name details of your environment aloud, do something distinctly human like reading or using technology. The goal isn't to reject or forget your shapeshifting experience, it's to integrate it in a healthy way that enriches your human life rather than replacing it. You should feel more yourself after good shapeshifting work, not less. So, if you're working with particularly challenging or powerful animal consciousness, like predators, raptors, or in some cases, even mythical animals, if we're talking about the astral part, consider doing the work in a sacred space with protective measures in place. Call on your guides or your helping spirits, create a clear ritual boundary, have a trusted friend nearby who knows what you're doing and can help ground you if needed. Whatever makes you feel safe and secure when you are doing this kind of work. Remember that not every day is a good day for deep shape shifting work. If you're feeling emotionally unstable, physically unwell, or dealing with major life stress, stick to gentler practices or take a break entirely. This work requires a certain amount of psychological stability and strength and integration to really be done safely and effectively. So, now that we've explored the practical techniques, let's talk about one of the most important aspects of shapeshifting practice and how to choose the animal allies that you'll work with. Because this isn't about randomly picking animals that you think are cool or spiritual. This is about forming genuine relationships with specific animal consciousness that can become lifelong sources of wisdom, power, and healing. I want to start by clarifying the difference between power animals, spirit animals, and what I call working animals. These terms get thrown around a lot in modern spiritual communities, often without much understanding of what they actually mean or how to develop authentic relationships with them. And yes, I understand different cultures have different meanings, but this is really just for the general sense of it all. So your power animal is typically a single animal that serves as your primary spiritual ally and protector throughout your life. This isn't something you choose, it's something that chooses you more often or not. It often reveals itself through repeated encounters, dreams, profound spiritual experiences, not it doesn't have to be just one. It's obviously a case by case basis. For me personally, I'm extremely close to corvids like crows and ravens, in addition to wolves, all my life. So, working animals are a different animal consciousness that help you develop relationships with for specific purposes and periods of your life. You might work with bear consciousness for a few months while you're dealing with a difficult situation that requires grounding strength, or you might develop a relationship with the hawk consciousness to help with a creative project that requires sharp focus and the more big picture thinking. Spirit animals are more like occasional teachers or messengers that help and appear when you need specific guidance or information. They might show up in your dreams and your meditations or even physical encounters when you're facing a particular challenge or transition in your waking life. So let's start by finding your power animal, because this is the foundation of all other shapeshifting work. This is the animal consciousness that will be your primary teacher, your protector, and guide in this realm of practice. The first thing to pay attention to is repeated animal encounters or synchronicities in your life. Has there been one particular animal that keeps showing up, not just once or twice, but repeatedly in situations where it feels significant or meaningful? These might be physical encounters, a specific type of bird that always seems to appear when you're making important decisions, or a cat that shows up in your life during transitions. It might be in dreams, the same animal appearing in different dream scenarios over months or years. Or it might be more subtle synchronicities, like pictures, videos, conversations about a particular animal with unusual frequency. Pay attention to animals you've been drawn to since childhood as well. Often, our power animals make themselves known in early life before we lose the natural openness to non human consciousness that children possess. What animal did you obsess over as a kid? What stuffed animals did you cling to? What nature documentaries could you watch over and over without getting bored? Dreams are one of the most common ways power animals reveal themselves. If you've had repeated dreams about a specific animal, especially if those dreams felt particularly vivid or meaningful, that's usually a strong sign. Pay attention to the dreams where you even become the animal, where the animal is speaking to you, or where you feel a deep connection or recognition. Meditation and journey work can also help reveal your power animal, setting aside time for specific meditation sessions where you intentionally ask to meet your primary animal ally. Again, not forcing or expecting anything specific, but just create the intention and see what comes up. Your power animal might not be what you expect. It might be something completely ordinary, like a pigeon or a house cat, or, something you've never felt particularly drawn to before. The key indicators that you've found your actual power animal rather than just an animal you find appealing are consistency and resonance. True power animals keep showing up. They don't disappear if you ignore them for a while, they patiently wait for you to pay attention. And when you do work with them, there's a sense of coming home, recognition, comfort, and this natural fit. This is something I see a lot of that people get confused about. There's a difference between animals you're intellectually or aesthetically attracted to and animals whose consciousness you actually need to work with for your spiritual development. For example, many people are drawn to wolves because they seem powerful and mysterious. But if you're someone who already has a strong pack loyalty and leadership abilities, working with the wolf consciousness might not challenge you or help you grow. You might actually need to work with something like a mountain goat consciousness to develop independence and the ability to navigate difficult terrain alone. I'm not saying this is the end all be all. You know, all these sorts of animals can mean different things to us individually. However, this is something that I think we should keep in mind. The animals that can teach you the most are often the ones that embody qualities you need to develop rather than qualities you already possess in abundance. This requires honest self assessment, What are your natural strengths? What areas of your life do you struggle with? What situations trigger anxiety, anger, or feelings of powerlessness? I do want to say here, whether no matter how you go about it when it comes to choosing an animal or having the animal choose you, there is a bit of a tricky part. You need to be ready for the medicine that the particular animal offers. Some animal consciousness is very gentle and nurturing. Other animal consciousness will challenge you, push you out of your comfort zone, or force you to face aspects of yourself that you'd rather ignore. Not all animal allies are meant to be lifelong relationships. Some animals come into our lives for specific reasons, transitions, or stages. Learning to recognize and honor these more temporary relationships is an important part of mature shapeshifting practice. Seasonal animal guides often correspond to the natural cycles of the year and the different types of energy and activities that each season requires. This might mean things like animals that naturally connect during the winter months when you need to go inward and conserve energy, or animals that are really good at new projects and opportunities, which require quickness, fertility, and light energy. Life stages guides show up during major transitions or developmental phases. You might work with a caterpillar and a butterfly consciousness during periods of major personal transformation. Snakes can become important during times when you need to shed old patterns or identities. And eagles and certain birds of prey might emerge when you are transitioning into leadership roles that require a broader perspective and spiritual authority. Maybe start to pay attention to what animals spontaneously capture your attention during different periods of your life and being open to exploring relationships that might be temporary rather than permanent. Okay, so as we kind of start to near towards the end, I know this is a super, super long one, but I want to address something that's absolutely critical for responsible shape-shifting practice, and that's cultural sensitivity and the importance of avoiding, appropriation. Many of the techniques and concepts I'm sharing come from indigenous traditions that have been preserved through centuries of oppression and cultural destruction, and it's essential that we approach this work with a deep respect for those traditions and clear understanding of the difference between appreciation and appropriation. Appropriation tends to happen when people from dominant cultures take spiritual practices like symbols or concepts from these marginalized cultures without permission, understanding, or even respect. It is especially problematic when these practices are stripped of their cultural context and are commercialized or used in ways that contradict their original meaning and purpose. Take the time to learn about the cultural context of the techniques that you are using. If you're working with specific traditional methods like shamanic drumming or a vision quest style practice, take time to understand where they come from and how they've traditionally been used. Work with animals that are native to your own bioregion whenever possible. There are spiritual and practical reasons for this. Animals that live in your area are part of your local ecosystem and energy web, your genus loci. They're more likely to be available for relationship and communication, and working with them helps you develop a deeper connection to your immediate natural environment. Now, this doesn't mean you can't never work with animals from other regions. Sometimes specific animal consciousness will call you, regardless of geography. Hence my lion experience. I do not live in a place where there's naturally occurring lionesses. But remember that you are developing relationships, not just using animal energy. Approach these consciousnesses as teachers and allies, not as tools or resources for your personal use. This means offering gratitude, asking permission, and being willing to give back to the animal world in concrete ways, whether through conservation efforts, habitat protection, or simply treating the animals in your daily life with greater respect and awareness. And finally, be honest about your motivations and your intentions. Are you approaching this work from a place of genuine spiritual seeking and personal development, or are you looking for something exotic or impressive to add to your spiritual identity? The animals can sense the difference, and shallow or ego-driven approaches to this work rarely produce genuine results. So as we come to the end of our journey together today, I want to leave you with some final thoughts about shapeshifting practice, which can mean in your life and why it's more important now than ever. We live in a time of unprecedented disconnection from the natural world. Most of us spend our days surrounded by concrete or steel, staring at screens, breathing filtered air. We've created a civilization that treats the earth as a resource to be exploited rather than living system to be a part of. And in the process, we've lost touch with essential parts of ourselves. Shapeshifting practice offers a way back, a way to remember that we are not separate from the rest of life on this planet. The human consciousness, for all of its remarkable gifts, is just one thread in the vast web of awareness that spans from the simplest microorganisms to the most complex ecosystems. So, when you learn to consciously shift into animal consciousness, you're not just gaining access to different ways of thinking and perceiving, you're participating in a form of consciousness that connects you directly to the living intelligence of the earth itself. You are stepping out of the isolation of purely human perspective and into a relationship with more than human world. This shift in perspective has profound implications for how we understand ourselves, our relationships, and really our place in the world. When you regularly experience consciousness from a wolf's perspective, you develop a deeper understanding of cooperation, loyalty, long term thinking. Cat awareness, you learn about self possession, healthy independence, and the importance of rest and play. These are not abstract philosophical insights. They are embodied ways of knowing that change how you move through this world, how you relate to others, and how you solve problems. They give you access to capabilities and perspectives that can transform every aspect of your life. But perhaps most importantly, shapeshifting practice helps heal the split between mind and body and spirit and matter, human in nature, that lies at the root of so many of our personal and collective problems. When you regularly experience yourself as an embodied, instinctual, sensual being connected to all life, you can maintain the illusion that you are somehow separate from or above the natural world. And I want to thank all of you, especially as a little side note, I can't believe we're climbing closer to 200 followers like every single day. It's amazing. I'm at the point of this whole podcast journey where I'm checking every single day. And I truly appreciate all the ears that listen to me. I am trying to lengthen my episodes a little bit. I think I've gathered a really good flow from here, and hopefully this one was not too long for other people. I think I really like the 40 minutes to an hour, and I just want to be able to give all of you guys a substantial bite to chew on, really, when it comes to my episodes. So, as always, wherever you are, have a wonderful morning, day, and night.